All right, good morning. So before we start, just a quick announcement, good news announcement. So those of you who have been keeping up with the emails and everything recently, in the service a couple of weeks ago, know that we are currently in the search for a contract minister. That's what one of my main duties has been as the head of the transition team. And as some of you may have seen in a couple of the videos recently, put out on our sort of social media and emails, the transition team has recommended to the board the Reverend Don Strickland for the job. Last week, the board accepted that recommendation, and I believe Reverend Strickland signed the contract. So a lot of good news from that. If you want to kind of have questions about what the contract minister looks like versus the settled minister looks like, happy to talk about that after the service. We've got some board members here. Also would be happy to talk about that. But also in our Wednesday email, we'll be getting an official update from the board on exactly where our sort of next steps are. And as a reminder, Reverend Don Strickland will be in this very pulpit on Sunday, April the 10th. So if you can be here in person, fantastic. If you can be here on Facebook, great. For those of you that, I don't know, if you can't do either, then the recording will be up, as usual. So, and if you've got some friends that are members or friends or interested in the church and maybe haven't been able to access in a little while, maybe remind them, hey, April 10th, big day. So I want to make sure everyone was on board with that. So, with that announcement out of the way, we'll go ahead and begin. Welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church, where compassion leads us to work for justice and equality. I'm glad you came today, and it is my hope that you will find something here that nourishes your heart, feeds your mind, and grows your spirit. My name is Tanner Trask, and I am your worship associate this morning. Be you a spiritual seeker, a theist, or an atheist, whether you find inspiration in the great books or the great outdoors or great conversations, all are welcome in our inclusive congregation. To newcomers and old friends both, together we say, welcome. Our guest speaker in the pulpit today is our very own Jana Kennard. She will be sharing a reflection by the Reverend Gretchen Haley titled Born of Bright Faith, first delivered in 2014 and allowed access by the Soul Matters program. Reverend Haley has an audacious ambition for the liberal church, believing in its capacity to transform lives and our world by way of hyper-local relationships and partnerships that inspire the unleashing of courageous love. Jana and her family are currently at Westside's first camp out weekend since the beginning of the pandemic with a number of our friends. So she'll be joining us through a pre-recorded reflection. So speaking of getting started, please make yourself comfortable for our morning's prelude, Rondo Capriccio Op. 120, Rage Over the Lost Penny by Beethoven, performed by Gwen Genius. never knew that one was called Rage Over the Lost Penny. I'm familiar with the song, but that's a fantastic name for that. All right. Our opening words are from the Reverend Dr. David Breeden. We ask, what's the point? To renew our faith, to renew our trust, that our world is enough, that we are enough. We ask, what's the point? To remind ourselves that loving our world and each other is our way. We ask, what's the point? To renew our faith that loving choices create a loving life. And now, in this time and place, let us worship together. A flame within a chalice, a cup with a stem and foot, represents the Unitarian Universalist Association, or UUA, and is a symbol of the Unitarian Universalist faith. The flaming chalice is a symbol of both the heritage of our past and the light of hope within this church today. If you have a chalice with you at home, please light it with our chalice lighting this morning. Our chalice lighting words are from Reverend Suzelle Lynch. Each time we light the chalice, we renew our commitment to our Unitarian Universalist faith. With the spark of a match, we make it new again. As fresh and surprising as the first day we encountered this spiritual community and realized we were home, we light this chalice for renewal of our faith. And our opening hymn this morning is number 42 in the gray hymnal, Morning So Fair to See. We have a special guest lead singer, Gwen's daughter, Melanie McFarlane. Welcome, Melanie. And if you'd like, please stand if you are able. Thanks so much. And join me in our affirmation that brings us together. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. You may be seated. Now, I imagine a few of the folks that would normally join us up front for the Time for All Ages might be at our campsite right now, but for the folks that are here this morning, If you'd like to have a close view for our time for all ages, this is the story of Olympia Brown, A Voice and a Vote by Janine K. Grossmeyer. This is the time for all ages thing down here, usually? Yeah. Trying to get used to this with the camera places involved. Oh, no, wrong way. Stage right. So, this is Olympia Brown. She lived from 1835 to 1926. She is the, depending on who you ask, the first or the second Universalist female minister in America. Depends on if you count someone that was ordained just by a church or ordained by the entire National Association. So when Olympia Brown was little, girls weren't supposed to whistle, girls weren't supposed to climb trees or run fast or catch frogs, but Olympia did. She did all those things and more. You can do whatever a boy can do, her mother and her father told her, and Olympia knew it was true. She climbed trees and ran fast and caught frogs, and when she was in school, she answered the teacher's questions loud and clear. "Little girls ought to be quiet," said one lady in town. "Little girls ought not to make themselves heard." But Olympia did. She had a voice, and she was going to use it every day. Now, for those of you that haven't seen schools in the 1830s and 1840s before, they were often one-room little schoolhouses, like this red brick one here. This is I think this one's a recreation or a restoration of an old one. They don't really have school in here anymore, but that's what it used to look like. And this is what it used to look like inside. You had these big desks, just a blackboard up front, no projectors, not even a single Chromebook. So when Olympia Brown was a teenager, young women weren't supposed to go to college. Young women weren't supposed to leave home to go off and learn complicated things, but Olympia did. She did all those things and more. Olympia left home and went to Antioch College in Ohio. She went to class and studied and learned all kinds of complicated things. "Young women ought not to be in college," said one professor at that school, "but since they are here, they must read their reports. Young women ought not to give speeches from memory like the men." But Olympia did. When it was her turn to present her report, she rolled up the papers in her hand and said each and every word loud and clear. Olympia Brown had a voice, and she was going to use it every day. And if you're curious, you can also go to Antioch College still. It's in Ohio. This very building still stands. So we talk about history and we see black and white photographs and we think, gosh, that was so long ago. And really, not so much. Now, when Olympia Brown was in college, women weren't supposed to wear pants. Women weren't supposed to wear anything except very long dresses that came all the way down to their toes. But Olympia did. She wore dresses that came down only past her knees, and under them she dared to wear pants. Bloomers, the pants were called, after Amelia Bloomer, the woman who had created them a few years before. "Women ought not to show their ankles in public," exclaimed some of the men, "and women certainly ought not to wear pants." But Olympia did. She wore her bloomers every day, no matter how much the men sneered. Now we have a picture here of a woman wearing the dress and then the pants underneath, the bloomers. Doesn't seem terribly shocking to me. And why might women want to wear bloomers at school, you may ask? Well, there were still women's basketball teams back then, and it seems easier to play in bloomers than it would be to play in a dress. But I haven't done both, so I technically couldn't tell you for sure. Now, when Olympia was finished with college, women weren't supposed to be ministers. Women never stood up in front of a congregation and talked about God, but Olympia did. She did all those things and more. Olympia graduated from the theological school at St. Lawrence University in 1863. Civil War buffs might recognize that date. And she was ordained as a Universalist minister in June of that year, the second woman ever to be officially ordained by that church. She became the Reverend Olympia Brown. Women ought not to speak in public, said a minister at that time. Women ought not to take the pulpit or discuss the nature of God. But the Reverend Olympia Brown did. During the next 35 years, she was a minister in 5 different congregations. And she visited other congregations too. She took the pulpit in every single one, and she spoke on the nature of God and love, and she did an excellent job. Olympia Brown had a voice, and she used it every day. Now, the church that she first got a job at was the Unitarian Universalist Church of Waymouth, Massachusetts, which is still around. Now, this is not the original building, but I believe this building dates back to about the 1910s or 20s, so certainly a little bit of time ago. And yes, on their website they do mention that one of their ministers was Olympia Brown. Now, when Olympia Brown was born, women weren't allowed to vote. Women weren't allowed to have any say in who was elected president or senator or mayor of the town, but Olympia had something to say about that. Olympia had a lot to say about that. She traveled all over the state of Kansas in a horse and buggy, giving speeches to convince people that women deserved the right to vote. She wrote hundreds of letters. She spoke to the representatives and senators in Congress. She marched in parades. Olympia and her friends worked hard to get women the right to vote. Olympia Brown had a voice, and she used it every day for over 50 years. Now, this isn't Olympia Brown's horse-drawn carriage, but this is a group of suffragettes' horse-drawn carriage. You can see the white dresses, which a lot of suffragettes wore back then. I guess Amelia Brown probably wore white bloomers. And on the carriage, there's a lot of slogans for women's rights to vote in there. Now, finally, when Olympia Brown was old, women were allowed to vote. In November of 1920, when Olympia was 85 years old, she voted for the very first time. Olympia had always had a voice, and she'd used it to make sure that she and all the other women in the United States had a voice as well. We have one last picture of her as a little bit of an older woman. So, photographs of her, no color photographs of her, but to give you an idea of how not long ago this was, my grandmother was born in 1918, and she only passed a few years ago. So she lived at the same time Olympia Brown did. My grandmother, not my great-grandmother, not my great-great-great-grandmother, my grandmother. So not very long ago at all. Thank you so much for sharing this story. And now I'd like to invite Brenda McKeon up as our pastoral care representative.
Good morning. In our community here at Westside, we make time each week to share pieces of our lives with one another. We do this because each person in this community has value. Each person's experience matters. Submit your joys or concerns to the team by emailing us at pastoralcare@westsideu.org or contacting any team member. We share our concerns with one another today, knowing that sorrows come into each person's life, knowing that together we can offer comfort. And we have one concern. It's from Kim Lucas Hart and her husband Eric. Eric's father was placed in hospice on Tuesday, and he passed away this morning. We will keep them in our hearts. We also share our joys with one another, knowing that your joys come into our lives, knowing that together our voices can raise into a chorus of celebration. We don't have any joys today. We make space each week for musical centering, knowing that life and experience of for each person matter, and together our light shines brighter. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. As we hold all the joys and concerns among us, both those spoken and unspoken, let us center to Comfort Me, number 1002 in the Teal hymnal.
Good morning. My name is Diane Austin, and I am one of the meditation leaders. I invite you to relax your mind and body and join in a time of meditation. It will begin with a pastoral introduction before we move into a time of silence. Our Tibetan prayer bowl will sound to signal the start of your own meditation, prayer, or reflection. And it will sound again at the end of that time. Our pastoral introduction today is a meditation from Reverend Michelle LeGrave. Breathe in, slowly now. Breathe out. Breathe in, gently now. Breathe out. Listen to your breath. Listen for another's breath. Whether you are here in the sanctuary, at home, with a family member, or a cat, or at a local coffee shop, listen. Now place your hand on your chest, or do so for another if they need and want your help. Again, slowly now, breathe in and breathe out. Some of us hear with our ears the sounds we make, the sound others make. Some of us hear with our eyes, watch lips and hands and arms and body movements. Some of us hear with our bodies, feel vibrations in the air and on our skins. Slowly now, breathe in and breathe out. Listen in the many ways you know how. As we breathe together, some of us on our own, some of us with help, so too do we live together. Gently now, breathe in, breathe out. Breathe out, breathe in. Together and apart, we are many and we are one. Breathe in, breathe out. Listen in the many ways you know how. As together we enter into the silence. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
Okay. Is there the song now? Or, okay. Yeah. All right, sorry. The purpose of the church is to encourage all who gather there to grow more generous in spirit and in action. This is the great end of all the world's faith traditions, to bring the human being closer to the divine acts of creation and compassion. In the spirit of generosity, Westside chooses to reach out to our wider community. We now take an offering that allows us to exercise that all-important generosity of spirit, an offering that will support this self-supporting church and its ministries. Our plate offering for March will go to NAMI, Tarrant County, the National Alliance for Mental Illness of Tarrant County. NAMI, Tarrant County, is a grassroots mental health organization, part of the largest grassroots mental health organization in America. In addition to Tarrant County, it serves, In addition to Tarrant County, it serves Johnson, Parker, and Wise counties. It provides free, peer-led mental health education classes and support groups for individuals living with a mental health condition and their loved ones, as well as hosts community events. Its goals are to advocate for non-discriminatory access to quality health care, housing, education, and employment for people with mental illnesses, and to improve the quality of life for all affected by mental illness, and eradicate the stigma and misconceptions of mental disorders. NAMI Tarrant County holds monthly support groups at its Fort Worth office and provides presentations which offer audiences the opportunity to hear stories of lived experiences from people with mental health conditions. The gifts of the congregation will be most gratefully received here in the sanctuary through the Vanco mobile app, our church website, or a check by mail. And please enjoy this musical offering, Gloria from Domine Deus by Vivaldi, performed by Melanie McFarlane and Gwen Genius. Thank you for putting into practice the spiritual virtue of generosity. Our giving connects us to the wider web of community. And now, please welcome our guest in the pulpit this morning, Jana Kennard, first reading Sharon Salzberg's Bright Faith, then delivering Reverend Gretchen Haley's sermon, Born of Bright Faith.
Our reading this morning is Bright Faith by Sharon Salzberg. The state of love-filled delight and possibilities and eager joy at the prospect of actualizing them is known in Buddhism as bright faith. Bright faith goes beyond merely claiming that possibility for oneself to immersing oneself in it. With bright faith, we feel exalted as we are lifted out of our normal sense of insignificance. Thrilled as we no longer feel lost and alone. The enthusiasm, energy, and courage we need in order to leave the safe path, to stop aligning ourselves with the familiar or the convenient, arises with bright faith. It enables us to step out, step away, and see what we can make of our lives. With bright faith, we act on our potential to transform our suffering and live in a different way. Bright faith can resemble blind faith. Both tend to be inspired by something or someone outside ourselves that can send us off on sudden journeys around the world in pursuit of a dream. But blind faith is associated with an unthinking devotion that is mistakenly seen as the fulfillment of the journey of faith rather than an early step. Bright faith, on the other hand, is seen simply as a beginning, and not a beginning in which we surrender discriminating intelligence, but rather one in which we surrender cynicism and apathy. Its abundant energy propels us forward into the unknown. Our reflection today, born of bright faith, is from the March 2022 Soul Matters packet and was written by Reverend Gretchen Haley and given on September 21st, 2014. As the congregation at Foothills Unitarian Church in Fort Collins, Colorado, was going through a time of transition, an interim time, as Reverend Gretchen calls it. I'll be reading the reflection this morning in her exact words. Writer Elizabeth Lesser tells the story of when she traveled to Jerusalem under the guise of tourism, but in truth, as a way of dealing with her messed up marriage and off-track life. One day, she found herself drawn to a narrow, dusky shop, so she went in. In the back of the room, she found two men drinking tea at a low table. After a while, the younger of the men came forward to greet her and looked at her as if he was trying to read the secrets of her heart. And then he said in perfect English, "Come, you will like this picture," and took her toward a framed piece of art. At that point, the older man came to greet her and placed his right hand on his heart and bowed his head in the traditional Islamic greeting. "See the rose?" he asked. Framed in dark wood, it was an image of a rosebud with shimmering pale petals holding one another in a tight embrace. Under the flower was an inscription with the words that are printed in the order of service today by Anais Nin. And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. As Lesser read it, she found her eyes stinging with tears. "What is wrong?" the young man asked her. "Nothing is wrong," she tried. I'm fine." "No, you are in pain. And do you know why you are in pain? Because you are afraid." "Afraid of what?" she asked, wondering how he could see so clearly into her heart. "Afraid of yourself," the man replied, and he placed his hand on his chest and patted his heart. "You are afraid to feel your real feelings. You are afraid to want what you really want. Just what the painting says. Your heart is like the flower. Let it break open. What you want is waiting for you in your heart. The time has come. Most of us recognize this kind of moment, both the struggle Lesser was in and the hope of following a new path, the hope of finally blossoming after holding our lives tight in a bud. We get it because we've had it in one way or another. Overcome with loss or struggle, or the pain of trying to make sense of the world for all its senselessness, we go in search of a new way, and somehow that new way presents itself, and we respond with yes, despite no new evidence, no change in fact of circumstances, just a new conviction, and then we follow through, and then we follow it through. This is faith. And when life is falling apart, there is nothing more important. To be able to say, despite any proof to support such an idea, there remains another way. To be able to say we can choose love, or that love chooses us, and love can make a difference. To hold on to that vision, that imagination, and to live as if it were true, and to make it so by living it that way. This is life-saving faith. In the Christian framing of this story, we might call that struggling place sin. After all, sin in its fullest sense simply means to describe a state of separation. Separation from one another, from our truest self, and from the source of life itself, which, to be clear, assumes that right living comes when we are in right relationship in all of these three: self, other, and the spirit of life. And so, separation in any would mean living a less than ethical life, less than the life we are called to live. Taken this way, it's pretty clear that sin is its own punishment, as our Universalist tradition has long claimed. In Lesser's story, she was separated in all of these ways, from those around her, her husband and children, her travel companions, her country, separated from her truest values and the spirit of life calling to her, and separated from herself. The invitation in the Israeli shop was to return to relationship with all of these, to open herself to all of these, to live beyond fear and in love. In that moment, something in her surrendered. She allowed herself to not simply imagine a world beyond her suffering, but to take steps to change her life. As Sharon Salzberg describes it, this feeling that allows for actualizing possibilities, this love-filled delight and eager joy, is described in the Buddhist tradition as a state of bright faith. As Salzberg says, with bright faith, we feel exalted, and we are lifted out of our normal sense of insignificance. Thrilled as we no longer feel lost and alone. And it is this feeling of joy that propels us forward, allows us to risk opening ourselves up to a new and greater love. This is a different way of thinking about faith than many of us have been taught. Faith is so often thought of as an intellectual assent to some particular belief. But in this model, faith, in its earliest stages, is a feeling of joy and safety, like the earliest feelings of being in love. In this state, intellectual assent has no bearing. You only know goodness, that there is goodness, and it's good, and so let's have more of that. Perhaps if you think back to your earliest days in this religious community or in another Universalist, Unitarian Universalist congregation, you will remember feeling like this. I know for me, the feelings I had when I discovered my first Unitarian Universalist congregation remain to me quite tangible. I cried through the whole service as I felt overwhelmed by a sense of joy and energy. Actually, I think I cried through the first 3 or 4 services I attended. It was like this great release, an exhale. I felt hopeful and like the world I longed for was actually possible, and I wanted to be a part of making it so. Maybe some of our new members that we have welcomed today are feeling the same kind of abundant energy. Maybe these are the feelings that led you to say yes to the promise of membership, to say yes to partnering with this community of faith as we live as if love matters. I hope so. As we think back on our journeys of faith, I wonder what each of you remember about those earliest feelings, what we can say about their source, and what made us receptive to those feelings. Salzberg describes that most often the source of bright faith is external, a person or a place or words or ideas, any of these that grab hold of our heart and open us up, change us. I know it may seem trivial, but the source for me back in that first Unitarian church was the greeter at the front door. She saw my partner and I as a couple, and she welcomed us. And the next week, she remembered us and welcomed us again, which, yes, I do hope inspires more of us to be a greeter on Sundays. You never know who needs to see you, who needs you to remember them, and what your kindness will mean. I was receptive to these bright faith feelings because I had been having the opposite experience in my family and in the religion of my childhood. I'd been feeling lost, and I yearned to be found. Without such a yearning and a struggle, without being so heartbroken, I'm not sure I would have been as receptive to the experience I had that first and the following Sundays. In the Christian narrative, faith comes in response to a confession of sins. Remember separateness, a confession of feeling separated from yourself, from others, from God. But I have wondered, what if you aren't feeling separate? Do things have to be broken apart in order for faith to matter? After thinking about it a lot, I've decided the answer is yes and no. Yes, because ultimately faith matters only when another world is needed. Faith is an act of imagination and life orientation. And you don't need imagination or living as if something were true, if it is already true. If this world and the life you have right now is already enough, you don't need to create another. Only when you believe life is less than whole or less than what it could be are you compelled into partnership with the creation of this new and better world. And yet, you need not be living in this state of deficiency in order for faith to take hold of your heart. Which is good news for us Unitarian Universalists, not just because of our core assertion that people are not inherently sinful, but inherently good, but also good news because we are so often people who live far from life's edges, with abundant resources and a profound sense of security and goodness. Which is not to say our lives can't be a mess, but even with all these blessings, still faith calls to us. For the power of bright faith is its capacity not only to call you into a new life, but in the love-filled experience, immediately teach you why such a life is needed. Not because the prior life was bad, or you were bad, but because life keeps getting more possible. Beauty grows, and we need all of us to live within the reach of love and its abundant gifts. It's like the moment of holding my daughter for the first time. I had no idea what my life was lacking until life called me into a greater joy. And it was perfect and could get no better until a couple years later, it happened again with my son. And it's like the first time I sat with an immigrant facing deportation in the courtroom. I was there with other Unitarian Universalist clergy. We held him in prayer and song. We were all held in prayer and song, surrounded by both love and hope, as well as heartbreak and suffering. I felt at once the great sense of how my life was blessed, that I was okay, and yet life itself was not, and so I was not. I've been thinking about this interim time a lot, as you can imagine. 6 months or so, I wondered how it all would work, because I realized that for many of us, another world was not necessary. The one we have had is just right. There is so much goodness here. There is not separation. There is whole and holiness. And yet, I have this sense, and the board has this sense, we have this sense, this vision for us that is more. But how do we talk about this more without appealing to a narrative of deficiency? Because there is indeed so much that is right. Faith may seem unnecessary or irrelevant, right? Except the thing is, bright faith keeps happening. It has happened here today for some of you, I'm sure, because there is so much beauty here and we keep making more of it. And from these experiences, we will discover both the goodness of what has been and also the possibility of something more. And from this, we will feel compelled to act. We, the Foothills Unitarian Church, as we have been and are yet to become, will be born again and again in these moments that strike us so deeply, unpredictably grab hold of us. We will be born of our memories of the past experiences that filled us so fully and compelled us and tell us who we are. And we will be born of those moments we experienced during this interim time, moments of joy and love and beauty. We need more choir singing of the ways life is all connected, more sharing our stories in small groups, more building relationships with immigrant families, more learning together. We need to read stuff together, sing together, try new things together. Not because what we have is not enough, but because bright faith is not a one-time experience, but always being offered anew for a new age. Some of what we do together during this interim time will be less than joyful, sure. And that will be important information too. But also, some of it will lead us to a beauty we had never before realized was possible. And some of it will lead us to understand the ways that our life may be okay, but life itself is not. And we, this church, our church, is compelled to act, to step out, step away, and see what we can make of our shared lives, to see where love calls us to now. And still, my friends, this is just the beginning. Bright faith is just the beginning. While it is good to arrive, good to feel this feeling of surrendering cynicism and apathy and imagining all the possibilities, the energy only matters when it actually leads to the work. As my colleague, the Reverend Mike Moran, likes to say, spirituality is not a spectator sport. You have to dive in. Last week, David spoke about spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices. In this congregation, you are invited to a whole host of potential practices, a path of 5 things that help move you along toward what the Buddhists describe as a verified faith. Come to worship regularly, connect in the community, build relationships with those around you, grow in spirit through small groups or classes, and then serve within or beyond the congregation. And finally, give of your resources in gratitude for all that we have been given. These things will transform elation and energy into depth and maturity so that our experience of faith is anything but superficial or temporary. In our community of faith, let us put love-filled delight in the center of our vision, and let this joy call us forward into a day we cannot yet even imagine. And then let us dive in, do the work required. All those disciplines and practices, they are fun too, it turns out. Let's do that work, bearing the light of love for one another and for the world, so that we might keep on sharing and growing all of this beauty. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
Seven, faith of the larger liberty in your gray hymnal. Please stand as you're willing and able. Trans Day of Visibility is this coming Thursday, March the 31st. This day was founded in 2009 by Rachel Crandall, and it has been celebrated by many since. Our closing words are from Rachel, from an article she wrote ahead of last year's Trans Day of Visibility. Today, I'm inspired by all the young people out there who are coming out. It was not that way when I came out. Most trans people I knew in the 90s were coming out in their 30s, but it's different now. Youth are coming out in droves, and they're the future. The youth are the ones who are going to carry on, and I really think they're up to it. Because of them, we're going to have a bright future. The flame is extinguished, but not our hope for the future, our courage in the face of crisis, or the love we share in all the world. Join me in a congregational closing by Jim McGaw. Go in peace, seeking justice. Go in peace, committed to equal rights and opportunities for all. Go in the peace that is created when together we build communities of true solidarity, deep compassion, and fierce, unrelenting love. Go in peace. Now that ends our formal service, but we have another opportunity to be in community with one another. You can join our virtual coffee hour on Zoom until 12:30 this afternoon. The link is in the email that was sent this morning from Westside UU Church. If you are not on our mailing list, please visit westsideu.org and sign up by clicking the link at the very bottom of our homepage. Thank you again to Jana for her reflection this morning, Gwen Genius and her daughter Melanie McFarlane for the wonderful music, as well as our own Dr. Yuki Kumamoto, and thank you all for joining us today. Have a wonderful week and be safe. And if you weren't here at the very beginning of the service, the minister that that the transition team recommended to the board, Reverend Don Strickland, I believe signed his contract very, very recently. So the board will be sending out an official update on that, I believe, in the Wednesday email. So keep an eye out for it. Thank you all so much. Take care.